Okay, so I'm going to go for Graha movement and world events. And that's of course me. And welcome to Narasimha Rao ji. And we've got our students Joshua and Shivansh, Ronak and Lakshmi over here as well. And I think it'll be a very interesting session. Let's go for some of the interesting points which I'm going to make over here. Now, in the first part of this session, I want to just concentrate on Mars in Gandanta and its association with Mars travel related accidents. Now, what is Gandanta? And I'll get Narasimha Rao to come in a moment as well on Gandanta anyway, and he can talk about Gandanta a little bit. But Gandanta in Jyotish applies to the junction of a fire sign and a water sign. And effectively what you got is the junction of Pisces and Aries, the junction or Meena Rashi and Mesha Rashi, junction of Cancer and Leo, and the junction of Scorpio and Sagittarius. And there are also the points where the certain nakshatras end. So for example, at Pisces, between Pisces and Aries, you've got the Revati nakshatra and Ashwini nakshatra. So Revati nakshatra will end and Ashwini nakshatra will start. And then between Cancer and Leo, of course, you've got Ashlesha nakshatra, which will end, and Magha nakshatra, which will start. And Ashlesha, of course, is known as the Sarpa nakshatra, or nakshatra which is ruled by Sarpa Devata. And then you've got the Pitru nakshatra, which will start of Magha. And then, of course, you've got the Gandanta of Jeshtha. So we were talking about the Gandantas, and so the point at which the Vrishchika Gandanta and Vrishchik and Dhanu Rashi Gandanta is basically between Jeshtha Nakshatra and Mula Nakshatra. So you've got the three Gandanta points. And although I have put it between 26 degrees 40 minutes of Pisces to 3 degrees 20 of Aries, strictly speaking, when you're considering it, it's probably closer than that. So you're talking about maybe a degree and a half on either side. And I don't know, what's your impression about this, Narasimha? Would you say that only a degree on either side, a degree and a half, or would you say something else?
Parasara actually defined one nakshatra pada. So actually,
okay,
3 degree 20 minutes as you have it here is Gandanta. Except that if it is closer to the border, the
right,
closer it is, the more dangerous it is. So about a degree typically is considered to be really, really dangerous. That's considered deep Gandanta, whereas this is just Gandanta. But Parasara gave one nakshatra pada, so one Navamsha. So what you have here is right.
Right. Perfect. Right. Okay. Yeah, that was what you see. I was under that impression as well. But then a couple of people sort of said, no, actually, that's not the case. And it's only a degree on either side. But I remember reading it somewhere, except, with me, my problem is sometimes I don't remember where exactly I've seen that exact point. So, but yeah, good that you've clarified it, that it's actually Parashar Rishi himself who has said that it's, one nakshatra pada. So that is very useful. And the interesting thing is that in the last maybe 10 or 15 years, there have been two very specific air crashes which have occurred in India. And both of them have occurred at Mangalore airport. And I won't go into, two specific crashes where there has been, a problem in terms of loss of life, etc. So what are Gandantas? Well, these are the points, I consider them as points of danger, physical danger anyway. Spiritually, they may be a bit different, but in terms of, but there are points of danger in terms of practical Vedic astrology, where the grahas will lose their strength. They may give some bad results in terms of their signification. And of course, we've got Tithi Gandanta, Rashi and Lagna Gandanta. Here, I have gone for Rashi and Nakshatra based definition. And so these are the three sort of Gandanta points. And you can see the one on the top left corner of the screen, which is the between Pisces or Meena Rashi and Mesha Rashi or Aries. And then the one in blue on the right-hand side corner of the screen, which is between Cancer and Leo. Karka Rashi and Simha Rashi. And then, of course, the red one you can see on the bottom left of the screen, which is between Jyeshtha and it is between Jyeshtha and Mula, or that is between Vrishchika and Dhanu Rashi. And I want to just point out a very interesting association, because I would prefer the word association to causation. When I talk about any of these events which are occurring. Why is that? Is because I prefer association to causation. I mean, causation is almost impossible to prove in any case, although causation is what is described in the classical textbooks and all the granthas of Jyotish. So here is the first one I want to just point out, which was just last year, which was an Air India flight. That was 1344, which crashed 8th of August 2020 during an attempted landing. And Mars is in Gandanta there. It is roughly at 28 degrees of Meena Rashi on the 8th of August 2020 when that has occurred. The precise time I have put over there, but you can see very clearly that Mars is definitely in Gandanta. There is also one more thing which I will illustrate on this particular chart, which is here. But you can see the Rashi in which that is Pisces. So Mars and Moon are together over there, but Mars is basically in Gandanta. It is in Pisces or Meena Rashi. And that 28 degree point, we know clearly is in the Gandanta as per definition, right? Right. Now, I saw that and I thought, for some reason, I decided that I will check and see when did the previous crash occur, which was approximately 10 years ago. I think it was at the same airport, if I remember right. And that is a very notoriously difficult airport in the old terminology. I think there were only a few people, mainly military pilots, who could take off from that short strip. Whatever be the causes of that particular, the physical causes, but I'm just going to look into this. And I just want to show you the previous particular flight crash which has occurred. And that was on the 22nd of May of 2010. And you can see that that was an Air India flight which crashed on attempted landing. And can you see very clearly the black arrow I have given you, where you can see extremely, clearly that Mars is at 29 degrees. You can see that really, really clearly, right? So I'll go back one slide if I can, and just show you that previous one, which is Mars at 28 degrees. And then I go forward one slide and show you Mars at 29 degrees, right? So you can see it very clearly, right? And both times Mars is definitely in Gandanta. These are the two prominent crashes which have actually caused problems, basically. And both of them had Mars in Gandanta. Now, is there something else which is also evident in both these cases? Well, let us have a look. And in the first, in both the cases, Saturn was in an Earth sign. So that is another very peculiar thing to have occurred. So not only that, there is another thing with Saturn which I want to point out in a moment. So Saturn at 4 degrees of Capricorn on the 8th of August of 2020, you can see very clearly that Saturn is there at that 4 degrees. It is in Vakragati at that point. And the other one was Saturn at 5 degrees, mind you, 4 degrees and 5 degrees of Virgo. So one is in Capricorn and the other is in Virgo, Makar Rashi and Kanya Rashi. And so both of them are showing so clearly that it is in a Earth sign, and both are in Vakragati. And if I remember right, and nearly the same degree, by the way, which is quite coincidental. I mean, how sukshma that association is, right? So why that has occurred, I will throw it open to Narasimha in a moment, and he can analyze that and point out maybe some ideas he can think of. But these are two sort of factors which I saw in that. And there may be other factors, of course, which I have not yet looked at it in that much detail. The other thing I think is that Saturn was very close to a stationary transit, if I remember right, within a few days of a stationary transit. And it will, yeah, exactly. So that Saturn at 4 degrees of Capricorn was in Vakra motion, August to 2020. It would go stationary in just a few days. I think it's a 4 or 5 or 8 days, something like that it was. So as we know, the stationary transits of slow moving planets, especially Saturn or Jupiter or Mars or whatever it is, those I have seen resulting in very significant events. And why it should have occurred in this particular manner, again, that is a thing which is worth sort of thinking about. But and we can discuss that in a moment. But the fact remains that it was like that. And in the Earth, in the May 2010 case, so in the 2010 case, which was I think the Air India one, Saturn at 5 degrees was about to go stationary in a week's time. So in both those cases, you'll see Saturn one at 4 degrees, the other at 5 degrees. Both are in Vakragati or in retrograde motion, and they're both placed in an Earth sign, and they're both about to go stationary and both about to sort of, become in direct motion, but in a stationary transit, essentially. And plus the Mars in Gandanta and in different parts of the zodiac, but that's about it. And just to point out because what do I mean by, people who are not conversant with Jyotish and who are going to watch this video, what do I mean by Saturn is about to go stationary? So Saturn over here, you can see it is placed at 4 degrees of Virgo, and you can see that R, which is there at the side of that particular Saturn, R is retrograde, and that retrogression is about to stop, and that stops just so approximately in 8 days or so. You see it stops, and then the R symbol is no longer visible, and that means that it has now become it is about to go, it is going into direct motion, but it is stationary at that particular point. That is what I mean by stationary transit. So it's a junction between that R and not being retrograde anymore. And anyway, it is not something which I would have noted earlier, but now I have noted it in the last few years, maybe in the last 12 years, I have started to pay very close attention to it. What do you think, Narasimha? Why should it be occurring close to a stationary transit, and why should Saturn be, in an Earth sign while that is happening? Any ideas?
I don't have any thoughts. I mean, this is a very simple, very small sample set. I reckon that there will be air crashes even when Saturn is in all kinds of signs. Yes. Because Saturn will be in an earthy sign once every 10 years, basically. Right. So maybe it's just all accidents. Yeah, I think it's a coincidence that it's an earthy sign. But the thing is, Saturn is the planet of strife, depression, sadness, etc. So such a planet being in a stationary transit is conducive to this kind of event, mass tragedies. So Saturn having stationary transit makes sense, but earthy sign may just be a coincidence.
Okay. Yes. And Mars in Gandanta, I think that is interesting. That really
makes a lot of sense. Basically, Mars is the planet of violence and aggression. So his being in Gandanta is conducive to some violent events.
Right. But also mechanics, isn't it? I mean, engineering and things like that. And so, the mechanics failing, basically, in some way or the other, some sort of extra stress being put on the mechanical parts, which was not, possible for those mechanical parts, which are all Mars related. The moving parts, the moving parts, mechanical parts, engineering, and, the stress which is being put on it. in a Gandanta sign.
Just like some people consider when Mercury is in Gandanta or Mercury is retrograde, it's not a good time to communicate. Basically, communications can fail. If you are trying to communicate something at that time, it won't come across correctly, or there can be a failure. Similarly, when Mars is in Gandanta or Mars is retrograde, it can be conducive to mechanical failures.
So you see that again, it's not something I would have necessarily thought about, a few years ago, but it's an interesting thing to sort of look at. Okay, so this was one of the things which I saw. Now, what is the connection of the planetary movements, especially Mars, also Saturn, to great wars? So we'll come to Mars first, and then we can go to Saturn. And before I do that, I want to just point out this particular photo, which is of one of the generals of the German army. And so he is HEINZ GUDERIAN. And HEINZ GUDERIAN was, the man who developed the BLITZKRIG method of war in World War II. And of course, people who, I don't know how many people are sort of interested in this, but I have noted reasonable interest ever since I started pointing out these things. But I have been interested in following World War II and battle tactics and these sort of things between the various armies for some time, right? So HEINZ GUDERIAN was the man who basically was the pioneer of the Blitzkrieg in World War II. And HEINZ GUDERIAN was he was a very good battle commander at the time. And in World War II, I think probably one of the people who influenced at the point when Germany was taking Belgium, for example, and things like that. He was effectively the man who did that. And the time when it came later in 1941, around about August, what happened is that HEINZ GUDERIAN was in charge of the battle tactics, and he was basically getting the German army to within around 30 miles or so of Moscow. And that was a very, very crucial period, and we're very lucky, of course, that because this was somebody with a very brilliant tactical mind, and we are very lucky that all his orders and all his suggestions were completely ignored by Hitler. We're extremely lucky at this point of time. We can say that with confidence, because had he had his way, and had he continued the way he was continuing, HEINZ GUDERIAN, it is almost certain that Moscow would have fallen in September or so, or October of 1941. We are extremely lucky that that did not happen. But let us just see what happens in that 1941 period, just to give you an idea. So, of course, we know he developed Blitzkrieg, which is very lightning fast movement of the tanks, basically. So that is one of his, specialities, and he's very close to Moscow. But I want to show this. And you can see in August of 1941, you can see that Mars is now in Gandanta, right? And not only is it in Gandanta, but it is about to go in Vakragati in Gandanta, right? It is not just that Mars is in Gandanta. There's a 28 degrees 44 of Pisces, and you can see it's actually deep Gandanta, what we talked about a little earlier. And Mars is sliding into that Gandanta, and it is going deeper and deeper into that Ashwini and Revati nakshatra border. And then at Gandanta, at 0 degrees 40, it starts to go in that Vakragati movement, which is a characteristic thing of Mars. For that to happen is a disaster, actually. But it was a disaster for who exactly? Let us see. So that was the Vakragati movement. And what exactly happened? Well, if you look at what happened just after, while Mars was in that Vakragati, 8th of September 1941. So if you go back, I'll go back to that slide. You'll see over here that this is sort of starting at 21st of August of 1941. And so that Vakragati is roughly just a day or so, a few days before the next thing, which is this 8th of September 1941, right? And that is where you got the siege of Leningrad. Now imagine the siege of Leningrad is the 900-day siege. It's a prolonged siege. It's a bloody battle eventually of the city of Leningrad, St. Petersburg in the Soviet Union. And that's by German and Finnish armed forces during World War II. I just put up the snap over there. No photographs really of the time do it justice. World War II was extremely horrific event. And what happens? In that August end of 1941, instead of attacking Moscow, HEINZ Guderian is now ordered by Hitler, because Hitler's mind, you see, is being under, I always say association, but here I'm going to make an exception. It's luckily under the influence of Mars. And he's ordered by Hitler to swing to Kiev, where the biggest encirclement of Soviet troops was to take place. And this directive, which was issued by Hitler, this is called as Directive 33. So only the infantry continued to Moscow. The armored cars and everything else went to Leningrad in the north and Ukraine in the south. It's almost like it went like that, right? Instead of going like that, just went up and down. By that time, he was 30 miles from Moscow, and I believe he was able to see the spires of the Kremlin. And that attack, by the way, was aborted on the 23rd of August of 1941. And I just showed you that screenshot where I showed you the Gandanta movement of Mars, which is on the 21st of August. So that is the power of these sort of things, right? Just how it predicted so accurately in a way, right? Now, HEINZ Guderian protested very strongly, but Hitler did not listen. Of course, we are lucky he did not listen. Otherwise, most likely Moscow would have fallen to the Nazis. At that time, just 30 miles, imagine 30 miles is nothing for a Panzer tank, right? And he swung to Kiev. Moscow was saved, basically, because the infantry could not take it, of course. The Russians are exceptional fighters. They would fight to the last, man and woman, effectively. And then, of course, after that came Shani at Rohini Nakshatra. Now, Shani at Rohini Nakshatra, I keep talking about Shani at Rohini Nakshatra during all my Mahabharata talks, but people are not aware of what Saturn at Rohini actually is. And Saturn at Rohini is a deadly situation. It has got legendary status for causing dire disasters, right? Rohini, I think, is considered one of the Nabhi points, one of the crucial points of the zodiac, where Saturn's position is really going to cause immense disasters. So I just wanted to sort of show that. And what is its connection to the Mahabharata, we'll see in a little while. But those are the verses which are there of, as far as Saturn are concerned. Prajavatyam hi nakshatram grahastikshro mahadyatihi shaneshchara pidayati pidayan praninodikam. And then Rohinim pidayanesham sthito rajan shaneshchara vyavrattam lakshma somasya bhavishyati mahatmayam. You got a couple of other verses which I'll point out in a moment. But the interesting thing is, you can see over here the sky map, basically. And Saturn is about to pierce Rohini in July 1942. And I just wanted to point that out, that it is effectively, if you got June 1941, which was Operation Barbarossa, then you got the Battle of Leningrad, which is starting in September of 1941. And then you've got Saturn about to pierce Rohini. Essentially, between the two limbs is what I'm talking about, although it probably has entered Rohini a bit earlier than that. So this is July 1942. And I just want to point out this particular shloka at the side of it, which has come from Varaha Mihira. And Varamihira says, because that word Pida, if you look at the word Pida, which is there in the verses of the Mahabharata, Pida is actually not a, Pida is not an astronomy term. Pida is a astrological term. And you therefore have to explain it astrologically or through the Jyotish point of view. That is number one. Number two, it does not say Vrishabha Rashi anywhere. If you look at it over there, Prajapatyam hi nakshatram. It does not say anything about Vrishabha Rashi, right? And it says, it mentions that Prajapatyam hi nakshatram, or nakshatra ruled by Prajapati, as Rohini very clearly, Rohinim pida enne sham. And then it says Sthito Rajan Shaneshchara. So what I'm trying to say over here is, it mentions Rohini very clearly. It mentions that Saturn is at Rohini effectively in this particular case. But why should it be causing Pida? And that is explained by Varamihira. And Varamihira says that a lunar mansion which is occupied by the sun or Saturn, and there are other conditions, of course, as well, that basically causes Pida to a nakshatra. And Saturn at Rohini is, of course, a horrible, horrible thing. And I don't know how many of you know about the Battle of Stalingrad, which was 1942 August, but it is one of the only battles which I would say in the history of wars of the last century, the one battle where the winning side lost more people as compared to the losing side. I think it's close to 150,000 to 250,000 soldiers. And it got so bad, it got to the point where, again, I'm not sure how many of you would be aware, but Russia was one of the only countries at that point. The difference between Russia and Germany, you see, the Germans were basically they were saying that women were homemakers and all that. And the Russians, the women were fighting in the trenches, right? The women were actually in the same barracks as the men in that particular, in the Battle of Stalingrad. Why Stalingrad should have occupied Hitler's attention, we will never really come to know exactly why. We are very lucky in a way that it occupied his attention. Otherwise, had he not become entrapped in that particular battle at all, today, perhaps it would have been a very different story. So we are very lucky in a way that he got entrapped in that entire thing. And that is the power of Saturn. Because if you look at Hitler is a very typical Mars personality in many ways, and maybe Rahu as well, you know. And he got, his mind was perverted, you see, by Shaneshchara. And that perversion of his mind is what I think eventually has, caused him to become obsessed with this name thing. You see, it's Stalingrad. So he thought, he will get Stalingrad. And Stalingrad at that point did have a little bit of, it was manufacturing military armaments, but not to that extent. So this, I just wanted to point out. Also, I wanted to also just emphasize over here that, so World War II, effectively, the shadow of World War II was in that particular battle of, the Battle of Stalingrad, of course, was an important part of it, but Saturn at Rohini. The Bangladesh genocide, I just want to emphasize. And that, again, if you look at the movement of Saturn at that particular point, Saturn is associated with with such a horrible war. That particular thing was literally against innocents. And on one side, you've got an army essentially, and on the other side, you've literally got innocent civilians effectively, right? And they're being massacred, right? Literally, more than 1 million of them were massacred. And then, of course, you've also got 9/11, which 9/11 may not sound as such a horrible disaster in the context of these other two disasters. But if you look at the way that disaster has caused so many wars after that, so then you start to understand what's that power of that Saturn at Rohini. Yeah, it has got legendary doom status. So I just wanted to point out this in terms of what these things have, these movements of planetary of key planets have got on, what is their connection to the world events. And why have I ignored, by the way, this verse Bhishma 3:25? which has been taken by a few researchers, which is, by the way, in the Mahabharata, they talk about another verse, which is Vishakhayo Samipastho Brahaspati Shaneshcharo. And why is this not, Guru and Saturn? Is because the verse before that, which qualifies which are these two grahas, says Graho Tamrana Shikhau Prajulita Obhau Saptarishi Udaranam Samavachadhyave Prabham. Effectively, the two ignited or blazing grahas with shikhas. And as we know that only comets have shikhas. Comets, the coma effectively is pointing to hair, right? So it is shikhas. So there's no question. These are comets anyway. And also the obscuring of the Saptarishis cannot be done by Jupiter and Saturn, no matter how bright they are. So, and there's a massive distance between the ecliptic, which is the path which is occupied by the grahas in their sort of journey around the zodiac, and that particular thing essentially can never obscure or penetrate the Saptarishis. So Saturn must be at Rohini anyway. So this Saturn at Rohini, I just want to make another very quick point that in the Mahabharata war, Saturn is at Rohini effectively is, it is a given. If anybody knows Jyotisha, they will never ever say that Saturn was not, at Rohini. And amongst all the researches which have ever been done for the Mahabharata, Saturn's position at Rohini has only been considered by one research, and that is 3067 BC. And that is the only research which considers that Saturn was at Rohini. Everybody else has actually, most of the people have almost forgotten about it. They've just left it alone possibly because they don't know about all these things which we have just pointed out. Right. Now, I just want to also talk about Mars. And what I want to just show over here is the Mars retrogression just at Antares, before Antares in 2001. Antares is Jyeshtha, right? So you might remember that the prince of the Nepal royal family massacred virtually his entire family, right? And it was the worst thing to happen to a royal family in terms of a crown prince, effectively the crown prince of Nepal, destroying everybody who was in his vansh. And that particular thing was this Mars retrogression near Antares in June 2001, right? And the reason I point it out is because there is a particular verse which is pointed out by Karna in the Mahabharata. And that verse, which is pointed out by Karna to Krishna during the Karna Krishna Samvada, Kritva Changarako Vakram Jyesthayam Madhusudana, he says. And that retrogression of Mars, which he talks about it prior to reaching Jyeshtha Anuradha as well. But he mentioned Jyeshtha and Anuradha in that particular verse. But what I'm saying is he points it out just before reaching those points. So I'm showing you that, and I'm showing you that movement over here. You can see it over there on the right-hand side of your screen. And I'm showing you the movement during the 2001 June thing. And in both cases, why am I saying that this is important is because Duryodhan, who is the crown prince in the Mahabharata, is the one who is effectively responsible through his actions of causing the, people like Bhishma have gone, so many of the elders of the Kuru race, all the brothers of, Duryodhan and so on and so forth. So he's literally called a Vanshanash, right? And that particular thing is something very similar. And that is why I am saying that, when you can prove that this sort of thing is happening 5,000 years later, during 2001, it points to a very, very clear-cut sort of, Jyotish-wise, I'm saying, example of what we call evidence, I think, that it must have occurred even in 3067 BC very similarly. So just to point it out, those two things. I don't know whether Narasimha would like to come in on any of those points at the moment.
No, I don't really have anything to add, Manish.
Yeah. Any other thing you want to talk about before we go into the part 2 of this, which will be just literally a 10 or 15 minute thing? I don't know.
Well, one thing I want to mention is
Right.
We talked about First World War, then 1942 time frame, Second World War, and then 1971 Bangladesh War, then 2001 September 11.
Right.
The next one is coming in 2030, 2031 time frame. And specifically at the end of 2030, we'll have a conjunction of Shani and Ketu in Rohini and Guru and Rahu in Anuradha. It is a really crazy time. So the next disasters, next catastrophe is very likely to be at that time. And also, if you look at how the world is going, the pandemic, and then the slowly rising economic tensions between major powers, and all the tension over Taiwan, China wanting to control the silicon industry, because Taiwan is the heart of the silicon industry with all the manufacturing base there, like the TSMC, etc. So China's desire to control Taiwan, and US basically wanting to not let that happen, Australia being very nervous. All these things may play out and peak around that time. So 2030, 2031 timeframe is really a critical period for mankind. And what you mentioned, the Saturn in Rohini will happen. But at that time, it's not just Saturn, but also Ketu. Shani and Ketu will be very closely conjoined within a couple of degrees in Rohini at the end of 2030. And also Guru and Rahu will be almost exactly opposite them. So there is Gurchandala Yoga and Anuradha. So that's a really interesting time period that I'm looking at.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting you mentioned that. You see, during the Mahabharata war also, this Saturn Ketu were together. Now, that is something I have never really talked about much, because, how do you quantify a Saturn Ketu conjunction? I mean, for people who are not Jyotishis, they will not understand the dire nature of that prediction. Yeah, because Saturn Ketu in Rohini, effectively. I mean, that is so, there's a disaster. That's a disaster, isn't it? I mean, and I'm hoping it's not going to be a disaster in 2031.
Hopefully.
But
just to talk about Shani Ketu, Shani is a personification of sadness and disappointment, etc. And Ketu can show explosive events. Ketu is basically one of the synonyms of Ketu used by Vyasa is explosion. So one explosive, headless, reckless, explosive planet, and one planet who shows tragedy, etc., they are together and they are reflecting the nakshatra of Prajapati. Rohini is owned by Brahma, our creator, Prajapati. So that's a very important sign for creation and how humanity is. So that's a really diabolical transit, Shani and Ketu being together in Rohini within a few degrees.
As I remember, I can't remember exactly, but I think the Mars retrogression is also occurring very close to that Jyeshtha in the similar sort of time period. And probably we can check later, but I sort of remember, and there are some eclipses occurring in that same year in that time frame as well. So, it's a good time to be careful, of course, but it is hopefully a long time away. And of course, given the nature of this pandemic and given the fact that I'm a medical doctor, I have stopped actually thinking about anything more than maybe a week at a time. During the heart of the pandemic, it was one day at a time, but now it's more like a week at a time, right? Or maybe a month at a time at the most, I suppose. So it's probably we are thinking slightly differently compared to the rest of the population in many ways.